I would inform my past professional self that, things don't always go to plan. And they certainly don't always go to plan when you're parenting. And, you know, I think in my earlier parenting years, I thought that um, I thought that I was there to shape a little bit more and to influence and to steer. But I realized that I'm really there to sort of just guide, and um, to help them reflect and to think critically and to, um, almost like the bumpers when you bowl when you're little, right? To sort of be there to kind of help them stay back in the lane, right? But the lane is their own. And I think in my mind, I've always kind of compartmentalized, right, the developmental theory pieces from the parenting pieces. And at times, seen them as being overlapping, but neither of them have exact plans. They both have a lot of fluidity to them, right? The developmental theories obviously do. And then your student's pathway has a lot of fluidity and changes, and they're evolving and morphing and sometimes showing up differently than you've always known them to be, right? As they grow and develop.
Hello, and welcome to Student Affairs Now, the online learning community for student affairs. I'm your host, Dr. Glenn DeGuzman. I'm joined by our panelists of parents who happen to also be student affairs professionals who have graciously decided to have fun with me this morning and just have a personal conversation about their parenting journey and knowing that they all have kids who are about to go or are currently attending college. So let's get started. Student Affairs Now is the premier podcast and online learning community for thousands of us who work in, alongside, or adjacent to the field of higher education and student affairs. We release new episodes every week on Wednesdays. You can find details about this episode or browse our archives at studentaffairsnow.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Simplicity, a true partner. Simplicity supports all aspects of student life with technology platforms that empowers institutions like mine to make data-driven decisions. So stay tuned. At the end of this podcast, I'm going to share more information about Simplicity. So again, my name is Glenn DeGuzman. I'm the Associate Dean of Students and Director of Residential Life at UC Berkeley. I use the he, him, his pronouns, and I'm zooming in from Livermore, California, which is the ancestral home of the unceded territory of the Ohlone Muwekma, the Chochenyo-speaking people. This land continues to be of great importance to this present day, and it's still home to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other descendants of the Verona Band of Alameda County. So let's meet our panelists. I'm so excited about this episode, y'all, because this is, we're parents first, right? So let's get started. We have, let's see who's going to kick it off. Mari, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So hello, everybody. I'm Mari Strombom, and I work at Colorado State, which is on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute Nations and people. And I work as the executive director in Housing and Dining Services, and I use the she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm excited to be joining you today with the other panelists to talk about my two children.
Wonderful. Let's go to Dave. Dave, intro.
Yeah, I'm Dave Ruble. I am the Assistant Director of Residence Life for Care and Conduct at Western Washington University. And I am coming from the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people who have lived in the Salish Sea Basin throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. Particularly here in the Bellingham area, I'm speaking about the Lummi Nation and Nooksack tribe. And I'll be talking a bit about, I have 4 kids, but 2 in college right now, and then 1 that will be in the process in the next few years.
Thank you, Dave. And Shelah, welcome to the podcast.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelah Crear. I'm Associate Dean of Undergraduates at Rice University, which means that I work closely with retention and transition issues. So lots of things that my soon-to-be college freshmen will be going through. And I use she, her, hers pronouns.
Wonderful. Well, let's start with first, congratulations to all of you and to me. Like our human is finally going to college or are in college. And so we've got this unique layer, this additional identity that as student first professionals, you know, as I started reflecting about this episode, I'm embracing the fact that we understand that each person has their own journey when it comes to whether they go to college or not go to college. But we also work at a higher education institution, right? So Shelah, I want to start with you, but did you feel any additional pressure knowing that, like, what if your kid doesn't go to college? Like, I'm kind of curious, what tactics did you employ, or maybe you didn't employ, to influence your kid to go to college?
Yeah, I think my daughter would probably remember her earliest babysitters as always coming from the institutions that I worked at. They were always an extremely responsible, reliable student, whether they were watching her while I was at an event or whether they would watch her at our home. And so I think she, as a little kid, automatically associated positive things with them and with college. So I was like, let me try to establish these core memories where she has a really favorable understanding of what college students are like. And then I think that, she was always interested and fascinated by the students. I don't know that she, until she got older, really understood what I did, but the students themselves, I think, were always a source of interest to her because they were excited to engage with her. They they thought she was funny. It was kind of, I have a theater kid, so it was sort of her moment to shine and engage and interact with them. So I think that part made it easy when she was young. When she got older, she began to look at it with more of a critical eye and a critiquing eye, which is, I think what we want them to do, right? We want them to critique and look at things critically, but sometimes in the moment on the parent side, we're like, but don't critique too much, right? Because I want you to go and keep moving forward. So I think once, she hit kind of middle school, high school, then, it was really her looking at things through a more discerning lens and trying to figure out, like, what does this mean and why do people go? And, what am I supposed to be getting out of this experience? Both in terms of the academic pieces, but also in terms of the transformative, self-discovery components as well. So, I think it really ended up being a relatively easy journey because I don't know that I think she needed more convincing, but I do think that sort of the hiccups along the way came when it was really around trying to figure out, what do different schools offer? What does it mean to be in college? How is there variability in the experience? And, how does campus climate kind of factor into what my experience is going to be like as an underrepresented student, on a campus? Should she not elect to go to an HBCU?
Wow, those are some complex and actually really layered conversations that were happening in your household. Mari, before we start recording, I know that you had some interesting tactics to influence your kids to go to college. You want to share?
Yeah, so both my husband and I work here at Colorado State University. And so my strategy with our boys was I never actually talked to them about going to college. I just always talked to them about going to Colorado State. And it worked. So our oldest son, Max, is a sophomore here at Colorado State, and our youngest son, Kirk, is a senior in high school, and he's coming here in the fall. So my deviousness paid off. So
that's awesome. Dave, did you have any I mean, you've had two go to start, and then you have two more on deck. So I mean,
yeah, I think it's interesting. I really thought about this because I would say, if anything, I don't know that I felt pressure. I was the first person in my family to go to college, and so I don't know that there's a whole lot of external pressure. I think I probably understood with my kids because they've grown up here. Both myself and my partner are both in, Kayla works in elementary ed, so she's a teacher. So there's probably been some pressure on them with this idea of how important education is. And so if anything, I've tried to be really intentional in my conversations with them so that they don't feel like it's an expectation that they are coming to college. But I think there was just always this underlying thought that they probably would, mostly because they grew up here. I mean, Isaac, my oldest, we had when I was a resident director here at Western. And so I literally had him in a backpack teaching the RA class and walking across campus. And they have been to the dining hall. And so this is just a part of their culture growing up. So it's very familiar. The idea of being on a campus is really familiar. So
I'm envisioning you with a backpack and Isaac in there. That's awesome. That's incredible visual that I just had. So I want to ask this question because I think that and Shelah, Mari, I'd like you to kind of weigh in on this question. Knowing all of you and just kind of getting to know, just what we do, right? We engage in social justice efforts. Multicultural competency and inclusion is a big part of our work, our professional identity. And my goodness, we have been through a lifetime of training in connecting our professional practice to just our personal values. And we have experienced, real situations, both good and bad, in our work setting. But as a parent, we know this. And so before they even got to college, I'm curious to know how you approach this learning or this awareness with your human. Shelah, I'd love to get your thoughts on this one.
I mean, for me, it was about trying to be as transparent as possible. I think that the blessing and the curse is that we know how the sausage is made. We know how things move and how things, sort of evolve on a college campus. And so I didn't want her to be surprised. But I also recognize that part of what she needs to experience through her own development is self-discovery and navigation of these situations, right? So I often found myself in a tension of how much do I tell her, right? Versus how much does she need to discover on her own? I mentioned to you guys earlier, I have input is like number one on my strengths quest, and I'm always sort of trying to collect the data, trying to read the reports, and she will oftentimes tell me when we were touring or when we've gone to different events, she said, "Can you just show up as my mom and not as a professional?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do my best. She's like, "You have to ask that question to the group. Can you just pull the person aside and ask that question?" She's like, "because then everybody knows like that you probably do something in this field." I'm like, okay. So, for us, it's been sort of navigating the tension. I want her to be knowledgeable and prepared. And also when she's making decisions, because we're still in the decision-making process, for schools, I wanted her to think critically about things like, diversity demographics, climate, what resources a particular campus has to support you across a variety of different identities. How does it support students for whom you don't share those identities, but your peers will, your roommate might, your partner might. So, because all of that to me speaks to kind of this culture of support, right? So for us, it's been an ongoing conversation, and one that I found at times to be hard to balance between not sharing so much that I have an incredibly fearful child that I'm dropping off on campus, right? But sharing enough so that she's engaging eyes wide open, right? That she's aware and that she could factor those types of things into her decision-making process, beyond sort of what I consider to be like the footprint, the face of the university, right? The things that you see when you're touring or when you're looking on the web or those things, but the real sort of meat and potatoes of what they're like. So
that's pretty good. Mari, how did the conversations go in your household?
Yeah, so from a very different angle, right? So being a person with a whole lot of different areas of privilege, and my boys having a whole lot of privilege, that was always a conscious thought in my mind. I grew up in a very rural part of northern Wisconsin where those conversations didn't happen when I was growing up, right? We just all were, and we didn't talk about privilege or differences very much. So I had a lot of learning starting when I was in college and continuing through today and tomorrow and on into the future. And I wanted my boys to be good humans. And so since they were little, for me, it's always been about how can I talk to them about the ways that things might be easier for them than other people and the importance of compassion and the importance of stopping to listen and learn from other people, and not to make a burden on other people, but just to truly hear when they talk about their experience being different from your own, that's legitimate. Just because you don't share it doesn't mean that one of you is right and one of you is wrong. It's different, and being open to that. And we continue to have those conversations today, and I'll often share with them, oh, I just read this book, or I just had this conversation, or I just went to this training. And what I have loved is I've seen them grow, especially my youngest son will say, Mom, I saw this really cool podcast, or I saw this YouTube video, and he'll engage in those conversations with me. And it's been wonderful to see that compassion in them. And I'm looking forward to that continuing to bloom as they grow. Don't have similar conversations as much with my oldest son, Glenn. You'd mentioned easy conversations with your youngest and harder with your oldest. And maybe it's because our boys share a birthday. I don't know. Our oldest were born on the same day in the same hospital, but I have to prompt those questions with my oldest, or those conversations with my oldest, but they're good, and we have them.
Yeah, I tell that story all the time, Mari, that I don't know if Dave and Shelah know, or now I guess the world will know, Mari was my supervisor at Colorado State, and we had our sons were born, same day, same hospital. Thank you for loaning the anesthesiologist to Vanessa. So along this similar kind of like vein a little bit, Dave, given your work, I know you work a lot with care. I know you're in housing. We know that college, unfortunately, isn't always a bed of roses. As a student affairs practitioner, we know and we see things frequently that can make a college experience for anyone just go south in like a hurry. From a parent perspective, how did you approach that reality with your kids, right? Or I know you did, so I'm just saying, how did you do it?
And I think it's a hard one because as a parent, it's hard to not bring my professional self into that parent role and vice versa. But I'm really process oriented. So a lot of times it's as things would come up, like working in student care and conduct, like I at the dinner table would really present case studies sometimes to my kids on things that had happened. And so I talked to, to all of my kids about consent and the importance of communication and, how different it is now from when I was growing up and how much more information there is. And, but just not only an understanding of protecting yourself, but protecting other people too. That's really important. And that sense of having really authentic relationships and trying to be as engaged as I could, not only in my kids' lives, but being a house where their friends would come over and engaging with friends and seeing how those relationships went. Because I know how important that is to when they, if they choose to come to college, having that roommate, having the people that they interact with. And so I was really intentional, and I would say my wife Kayla is also really intentional about that. And I said before, she's an educator in early education, so she did a lot about doing much more intentional structural pieces as they were little. And then I think my focus has been more as the kids have gotten older, is that change in relationship from going from structural pieces to much more ambiguous and helping them kind of understand and see the world. I want them to see the world in a much larger way than I did growing up. And am I successful in it? I'm not sure. I don't think I can determine that, but they've been pretty successful in school and in the relationships that they have. So that's been my approach.
I would love to hear from Mari and Shelah if you have any additional stories or conversations. I want to add this piece because Dave, you brought up about this broadening awareness. I think that's something that's interesting for me, given my work. I've been in multiple functional areas. I mean, we've had case study conversations about sexual assault and harassment and alcohol consumption, the difference in, I feel like I'm a walking alcohol and drug class sometimes with my kids, because it's really interesting. The most interesting one I will share, because my daughter just recently selected a college to go to, and they were doing roommate stuff, and I'm like, hey, look, I kind of do on the double takes. I know this is going to be nerdy and geeky, but I can hook you up with a roommate agreement form so you can have these organic conversations in advance with your roommates, or kind of, right? Too much information. And we can get into that question about helicopter parents later on. But I don't know, Shelah, Mari, any other interesting thoughts on this question?
For me, I think the piece that kind of just sticks out is, the 4 years don't have to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be error-free. You're going to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be moments where you feel like you have completely messed up. And 9 times out of 10, right, you haven't. There is a small percentage in there where we're talking about some more serious ramifications to your actions. But the vast majority of the things are not going to be, sort of career or college ending. And the biggest piece that I've tried to really reiterate to her, really starting in high school, was this idea of you don't have to have all the answers, and that the best thing that you can learn to do if you don't master skills is to learn how to ask for help. I guess maybe because I work in a capacity where we talk a lot about help-seeking behaviors, she probably is, sick of hearing me say, help-seeking behaviors of them. But I said a lot of things can be solved by you seeking out help as soon as you get underwater, as soon as you start to feel like something's off, before actually you're drowning. Whether it's, struggling in a class, whether it's sure about how to navigate an interpersonal situation, whether it's, feeling off in terms of your mental health, whether it's just feeling lonely or not feeling like you're connected to the institution. Like, there is power and there is real bravery and strength in asking for help. And, the example I always give her that now I think she can recite is, I'm like, the kids in your classes who are sitting in the front row, and I call them the oohers, because they're like, ooh, 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 calling me. They want to answer every question. They've been doing that probably the entirety of their lives. It's like, they're usually the highest performing kids in the classroom. I was like, because they're going to get their questions answered and they're going to doggedly pursue getting what they need. And I said, and that is actually a trait to take with you. Be persistent about saying, I need help, or I'm unsure, or I don't know what's wrong, but I know something's not right. Because what we as professionals have all been trained to do is to help you sort out the ambiguity. I was like, you don't have to have the answer. You just have to know that something's off. And we can help figure out whether that's academic, interpersonal, connection, homesickness, whatever the category is that it falls into. So that's really, I'm like, if I can't teach her anything else, which what I've taught her is still TBD, at least I can get her, being open enough to not think that she has to have all the answers.
That is just phenomenal advice. As a first generation student, I'm glad I asked for help, because and your advice is just spot on, because I didn't know what the problem was. I just knew something was off, right? And just being able to ask questions with a resource on campus was just super beneficial for me to graduate. So thank you for that.
That's it. Kind of
Mari,
related to that. One of the things I've always worked with my boys, I'm probably starting in early high school, was wanting them to know they can always come to me or their dad with issues, but also knowing there's going to be times they don't want to come to us, right? And so talking to them about who are your resources. So similar to what you were sharing, Shelah, but helping them make connections to other adults and feeling comfortable making those connections, so that when those times come up where it's like, yeah, I don't want to talk to mom or dad about this, they've got somebody other than just their peers that they can go to talk about things. Now, I have no idea how often they've taken advantage of those connections I've tried to make for them, but that's another tool that I think is important for our kids to have, is to know that there's safety in other people, not just in family and not always in just the professional resources too, right? So
That's real. So my daughter has an Instagram account, and I learned not a while ago, but I know that they engage in conversations. So shout out to Annalyn Cruz and Wendy Sasaki, both in higher education, who you were part of the helping Allie get to college. So that's really good advice as well.
Glenn,
oh, go ahead. Yeah.
real quick, there was a couple things in what everyone else said that made me think. One is just anecdotal, is that I also I understand my daughter Hannah is a sophomore here at Western, and we've had this conversation too, because there's also pressure. And Mari, I don't know if you feel it, like not you, but your boys feel this, is I want Hannah to make mistakes. I want Isaac to make mistakes. Yeah. My son Josh just makes mistakes. But I want Hannah to experience those things. But there's also a pressure because I've told her, and just know that if an incident report's written about it, I read it. I'm one of the first ones that reads it. So just a heads up on how you make those mistakes. Which is probably better that I read it than her mom does. But that's a lot of pressure on her being here with that. The other thing is I was going to say, you were talking about stories. Last year when she was a freshman and she was living in a resident hall, I knew there was a pretty serious sexual assault situation, and the alleged perpetrator of 2 different sexual assaults was living across the hall from her. And as knowing that, I had a conversation with my supervisor on how I'm a parent first.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to breach some protocols here in a way that's appropriate, but I want to make sure she understands and isn't fearful of a situation, but that I can have a conversation with her to make sure that as this process is going through the conduct process, that I as a parent feel that she's protected in that too. That was probably one of the more difficult things for me last year.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to pivot from the script, y'all, a little bit, and I want to stay with you, Dave, and just skip a question and go to and stay on that vein. I think you bring up a very powerful thought. You have this role. We all have this role, right? We have an obligation. We're employees of an institution, and we're parents first and foremost.
Yeah.
And we talk about this concept of the helicopter parent and the hovering parent, right? And being connected. But we also, as student affairs professionals, have information. We have access to information. How do you manage or balance that? This is a really interesting question, because we have this privilege to some extent, right? And it's a tough one to. I know that it's a tough one, and I'm in housing too. I've had parents who are friends of my son and daughter who just contacted me can you call me if anything emerges? Can't do that, but this, now we're talking about your own child. I'm kind of curious, how do you manage that and maneuver that? And you kind of alluded to it. I don't want you to say, your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything that's going to get me fired, right?
Okay, yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, so I can think of 2 things. One, actually, it's been fairly easy for me to navigate it with Hannah here, although I worry because access to grades, access to a lot of things that parents call me asking for. I have access to that. And so I have to be, for my own integrity and for the integrity of the system, I need to be really careful around that. And so I'm mindful to ask Hannah questions about hey, how are your grades? That I'm asking her. I'm not going to source things. I love at Colorado State when Isaac went to CSU that you all have FamWeb.
Yeah.
Which we don't have here in the same way. And it was very nice to be able for Isaac to go on and give me permissions for things that would be FERPA related, that he was okay with me seeing. I really like that system.
It's wonderful.
Here about thinking about something like that. The more difficult one for me, Glenn, was Isaac. He He's graduated in 2020. So he went through that last semester of high school that was just decimated. And I saw this kid who knew he wanted to be an engineer from the day he was born, and got into Colorado State and was so excited about it. And it was my alma mater, and I was so excited, much to my wife's chagrin, that he was heading 1,800 miles away. And then COVID happens, and we had to make that decision whether to send him or not.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know. No one knew what was going to happen. So he did. He went off. He made friends there and stuff like that. But it was really difficult from an academic standpoint. It's a tough engineering program, but he was teaching himself because professors are trying to figure it all out, same way that we were trying to figure it out here. And he started having mental health issues. And I so bad wanted to be the assistant director of university residences for care and conduct. I don't work at Colorado State. And so I had to be the parent. And I had to try to help him navigate systems. And I had the benefit of knowing systems. I also had the benefit of knowing some people that I would make suggestions that he would connect. And then when those things weren't happening at some point, I called the resident director, and I'm like, I don't want to be that helicopter parent, but I just want to give you this heads up, and then you run with it. And then when things got really bad, I called Jody Donovan.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, Jody, he's not, I don't want to get too involved. Can you have a conversation with him? That was amazing. But I knew. And so what happened for me then as a practitioner here at Western is it gave me a whole different viewpoint of what I thought about helicopter parenting, and helping then navigate and really being humbled into understanding that parents don't have the information that I have. And they're struggling because they have these same dreams and aspirations for their kid. And they most of the time, they just want to help. Mm-hmm. And so I am much, much more patient with parents now. And I have an appreciation, but I can also have that conversation because I can relate to the experience that they're going through.
That's wonderful. And that's a shout out to Jody Donovan, who is a colleague of ours who works with students of concern at the institution, right? Yeah. Mari, I'm going to go back now. Actually, I'm going to go back. I'm just going to, I was going to ask, I'm going to go back. Flip-flop in here. Mari and Dave, I know and you've shared in this podcast that your student is attending where you work. As a parent, that sounds incredible. Maybe for my daughter, she would not like that, or they would not like that. But did you talk about that with your student? About that reality? I know, Mari, you kind of said something in the beginning about like they were going to go to Colorado State, but I'm kind of curious, how did that go for you all? Like any fun stories or interesting anecdotes?
Yeah, I think even though I was a little devious and always talked about them going to Colorado State, we absolutely had conversations about what would be right for them. And I know that both boys were concerned at one point about, well, but you and Dad both work at Colorado State. And, will we see you all the time? Will we run into you all the time? And so I shared with them stories of other colleagues who had their children here, and then the children would go to their office and say, I haven't seen you in 3 weeks. And it's like, yeah, campus is big enough and we're all in our own circles. You'll only see us if you want to see us. Mm-hmm. And so when our oldest son was a first-year student living in the residence halls, what I'd said to him, and I stole this from a colleague of mine who didn't have her son go to her institution, but went nearby, and said, I'll take you to lunch anytime you want me to take you to lunch, but it's up to you to make that decision, how frequently. And it ended up being almost every 2 weeks, he'd send me a text and say, hey, can we get together for lunch? I learned quickly it was less about seeing his mom and more about seeing the dog. So we would get takeout and we'd go home so he could see the dog, but I got to spend time with my son, which was wonderful. And then I'd take him back to the residence hall. And so I think Max, having had that experience, he was able to talk to his younger brother, to say, yeah, CSU is a really good school, and you won't see mom and dad unless you want to see them. And so I think that helped Kirk make his decision. And CSU was the only place he applied. And we also talked about, we get a tuition discount if you're here. And after getting your undergrad, if you choose to go on for further degrees, that can be a great time to go someplace else, because this is a great place to get your undergrad. And Max, I think, would say it doesn't feel like he's still in Fort Collins when he's on campus. It just feels like this different community than what he grew up with, because it's, we all know campus is a different kind of insular world, right? And so even though I did my pressure, we talked about what's right for them, and I feel really lucky that I'm able to have them both close enough that I get to see them more than just a couple of times each semester.
Yeah, and my experience is somewhat similar. I knew with Isaac, like he needed that separation. He needed to go away. He's back now. He's at Bellingham Technical College, still working in mechanical engineering, which is great that there's a program here that he can do that in. Hannah wanted to go away and then found that Western was a good fit and ended up being here. But same things. It's like it's right here. So it was hard for her to understand how good a university it is because it's the one in her hometown. I love having her here. I would not have pushed at all about her coming here, except I could see that it was a good fit. And I had her apply at many different other institutions, but same thing, Mari, as you're saying. Like I said, this is great. You're going into psychology, great degree, and you're going to probably really want to think about, furthering your education beyond this, and then that go wherever you want to go. And I'm pushing right now, and this is probably answering part of a question before, but I was also like study abroad. Western's got a great study abroad program, and you can do that as well. So I love it. She actually not only lives on campus, but she works in the office right next to mine. But she and I have that relationship where she just comes and steals my food. And so it works out well. Like she's not bothered by the fact that we have lunch every couple of weeks, and that's amazing to be able to have that experience.
Shelah, I know you already told us that your daughter has not made a decision yet, but would you want your daughter to go to the college you work at?
No. After listening to you all, and it's not anything on the institution. More so that the institution is smaller. And I've been there, for almost 15 years. And I wanted her to have the opportunity to be as known or as anonymous as she chose to be. And I knew that she would not be able to do that in the context with me. I also knew that it was going to take all of my will to not be, I don't even know if helicopter is the right word. We need something that's probably more extensive and more I had to be honest with who I am, and I'm not sure I was going to be able to have good self-control around all of it. So she never really looked closely at my institution. She also, as I mentioned earlier, is interested in theater, and so there wasn't necessarily always an academic fit. But I think it wasn't even a part of the conversation because she was looking at different types of institutions. So fortunately, we didn't have to have it, and I didn't have to really grow and develop as both a professional and a human in managing my own emotions around just all of the information I would have had access to anecdotally and from colleagues. So it wasn't on the table for us.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great. This group right here, you guys are funny and wonderful. We collectively have over 100 years plus of professional experience in student affairs. So yes, we are old. We also, because of this experience, know that there are a lot of student affairs services out there. They could be at your institution, or they can just be generally everywhere and at other institutions. So you know your child, you know them inside out. What student affairs service will you volunteer them that they got to use, they got to utilize? And I'm curious why. Who would like to go first?
I can go first on that one.
Oh, go for it.
So we have a wonderful, wonderful program here at Colorado State called Key. And it provides additional mentoring and support for first-year students. And there's a Key community for undeclared majors. And when my oldest son, Max, chose to come to Colorado State, he had no idea what he wanted to study. And in fact, at one point he said to me, maybe I should go to college because I don't know what I want to do. And I said, well, that's kind of what college is for. He said, maybe I should go to technical school instead. He said, okay, what do you want to go to technical school for? And he said, I don't know. And I'm like, well, then you can't go to technical school, right? So go to college. And I really encouraged him to apply to the Key Explore program because there's an additional mentoring component and they take a class together that help them explore different majors. And by the end of his first year, he declared a wildlife major. And that was just an incredible resource for him. He's very introverted. And the other piece I loved about that program is it created that cohort to help him make connections that I think would have been harder for him to make otherwise. So that was my volunteer for him. And now he's encouraging his younger brother to also look into that program. So.
That's great. Sheila, Dave?
Go ahead.
For my daughter, I think it's more so a particular function, not necessarily a department, because I think it could live a lot of different places depending on the institution. But for her, I will be really looking for her to find a connection place where people practice complete holistic advising. Because I think that if she can find that, whether that is through a student success office, whether it's through multicultural affairs, whether it's through academic advising, whether it's through some type of campus leadership and engagement entity, she's going to find people, professionals who are going to be excellent at diagnosing and triaging. And I think a lot of times first-year students sort of feel like they're in the wilderness trying to navigate all of the new. And so I think having someone that she connects with, an office that is used to dealing with students who are trying to figure it out, right, who don't kind of have all of the answers, will be helpful as she is trying to figure out and make meaning of who she is in this new context. So once she has made a decision on where her home is going to be for the next 4, 5, 6 years, the next piece will be really looking specifically at the campus resources that practice what seems to be this kind of holistic support, so that she can, have a definite place where I say start here, and they may push you out other places or refer you or connect you to other resources, but this is where you can always go to begin.
Love that.
Yeah, kind of along the same lines. That piece, like, I don't know that I have an answer. Because it really depends, I think, of listening. As I've listened to Isaac and I've listened to Hannah's experiences, it's trying to steer them in some directions. The biggest thing is just finding a home, like finding a place where you find people and you're able to connect and you find some mentors. And there's lots of avenues at any university, but I don't know, here at Western, I didn't understand the counseling center and the student health center as an undergrad, and really even as a graduate student. So I really have also talked to my kids a lot about like utilizing, just understanding those services and what's offered there, because there's so much more than just a reactive piece. It's a lot of the proactive pieces about staying healthy, utilizing the rec center, joining an intramural, and then, as I said with Hannah, like, is the study abroad, like get in and understand the opportunities that are here, because you're here for such a short amount of time that you don't want to graduate and not have connected and really become more of that filled out individual that we're all trying to build in other students, right? Yep. So I want to do that for my own kids too.
And you make me think, Dave, too, the other piece for me was encouraging my son to join at least one student organization.
Yes.
Right. I think we all know that the involvement theory and the importance of getting involved and connected. And I think that's another really important thing. And all universities offer that, right?
Yeah.
That's it's funny. When my daughter declared like where they want to go, so shout out to CSU Fullerton, go Titans. It was interesting. My strategy was, let's go onto their website and let's kind of peruse and take a look at the different services that were available. And, knowing what I know and allowing my daughter to just kind of peruse it. And I did the same thing with my son. We were looking at the community college website, right? Like looking at the services that are available. And I know that you can see how their personalities and their temperaments, they gravitated to certain things. The definitely thing they all did was look at the clubs and organizations for sure. So they were that's like almost the first thing that sticks out. But to the point that Shelah and Dave made, it was find that place where you can, that triage, that home, because that's when things like the earlier point Shelah made. If they start to feel like something's amiss or they start to feel a little bit underwater, where can you go and know that is there for you? So that is great to hear all that. This podcast is called Student First Now, and I want to close. It's always our last question, and it's funny because we can always reframe the question any way we want to. So I'm going to reframe it a little bit. It's called Student First Now, but I want you to close the reflection of your own experience as a parent and a student first practitioner, and specifically, what did you learn from raising a child that you didn't know before, and you would inform your past professional self before you had kids? So like, what advice would you give to yourself before you had kids? And I have Shelah, you can kick us off.
As a professional, I've always been a little bit of a developmental theory junkie. I love it. It's interesting to me. I think it's helpful in the work and provides context. But I would probably now tell myself, I would inform my past professional self that, things don't always go to plan. And they certainly don't always go to plan when you're parenting. And, I think in my earlier parenting years, I thought that I was there to, shape a little bit more and to influence and to steer. But I realized that I'm really there to sort of just guide, and to help them reflect and to think critically and to almost like the bumpers when you bowl when you're little, right? To sort of be there to kind of help them stay back in the lane, right? But the lane is their own. And I think in my mind, I've always kind of compartmentalized, right, the developmental theory pieces from the parenting pieces. And at times, seen them as being overlapping, but neither of them have exact plans. They both have a lot of fluidity to them, right? The developmental theories obviously do, and then your student's pathway has a lot of fluidity and changes, and they're evolving and morphing and sometimes showing up differently than you've always known them to be, right? As they grow and develop. So I probably would tell young me to have a lot more grace, both with her and with me. But to also recognize that, I'm not driving the ship. I got to be the architect of my own life, and she's architecting her life. And that doesn't always mean that we will be in agreement, but we can always be in support, and we can most importantly always be in dialogue about, what she's thinking and feeling, writing, and the rationale behind those ideas. So as we get ready to, T minus 3 months, 4 months to to move in, those are kind of the pieces I'm thinking about. And I have 2 more coming behind with a little bit of space in between. So, I'm hoping maybe I'll have it a little bit more figured out by the time we get to 2 and 3. I need to consult with you guys. Y'all are vets. Y'all are where I'm trying to get to in terms of successful, progress with the kiddos. So we'll see how it goes. Maybe we should do a recap a year from now, and we can talk about surviving the first year, right?
That is great. David, Dave, your thoughts.
Yeah. So I would say I loved, Sheila, that you said grace. Like, my first thought was patience, but grace is so much a part of it. I think, I used to monitor, I used to use recidivism as success. Like if students didn't repeat mistakes, then that was successful. Like I've totally rethought that. It's much more like the work we do, the important work we do is really relational. And to get away earlier of the transactional nature of conduct and student care and those things, and just how important that relationship is. And parents have taught me that, students have taught me that, but probably, and certainly what my wife has taught me that, but my kids have taught me that. And I teach the resident directors now that it's okay if students repeat mistakes, even the same mistake, because that first meeting is just setting up the second meeting, because that second meeting is where magic happens. That's where you can now dig into things and really have real conversations with students. And it's the same things with my kids. That's what I learned with them is it's the second time they do something. It's when they're a little bit more ready to talk about it. And then, in these cases, I get to be a professional, but with my kids, I get to really parent when their walls come down, because the excuses are different now. So,
really good. Mari, let's have you close us out.
Sure. I think one of the pieces of advice I would give my younger self would be to be more patient with parents who are my employees and who are my colleagues, because being a working parent is really hard. And I thought I had some understanding of that before I became a parent, because I have friends who are parents and siblings who are parents. I had no freaking clue, right? And especially the brain fog that is consistent when your children are infants and toddlers, and trying to balance everything, it just isn't possible, right? And so I think for me, it's going back to grace of I've learned so much more about how to give grace to my staff, who I know are working hard and doing their best and being pulled in so many directions because a child is sick and they have this deadline and all these other things are looming. And so I think I've got a lot more empathy and a lot more understanding so that I can hopefully support my staff to be successful and support my colleagues in the same way and extend that grace to them that I sometimes didn't always get, right, when I was a parent of young children. And then even as my children got older, there's other things that come up. So it's different than the stressors of having infants and toddlers. But we all go through challenges, right, as we're growing and learning. And then, as we've said before, my first job is being a mom, being a parent. And so I need to be there for my family first. And I also need to do a good job. And so, helping my younger self learn that earlier would have been great.
Wow. This was an amazing conversation, and I appreciate each one of you. And thank you. Right. So we need to wrap up. I want to thank our guests, Mari Strombom, Dave Ruble, Shelah Crear, for just joining in what was a fun and very insightful conversation about being a student first professional and first and foremost being a parent first. I want to thank Nat Ambrosi again, our production person who behind the scenes takes care of everything about getting all our episodes prepared, transcribed, and just online. And our sponsor of this episode, thank you so much, Simplicity. They're the global leaders in student services technology platforms with state-of-the-art technology that empowers institutions to make data-driven decisions specific to their goals. A true partner to the institution, Simplicity supports all aspects of student life, including but not limited to career services and development, student conduct and well-being, student success, and accessibility services. To learn more, visit simplicity.com or connect with them on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and whatever new technology platform pops up in the next couple of weeks. Our podcast would just not be possible without their support. So please visit their website, or visit our website. You can click on the sponsors link there as well. My name is Glenn DeGuzman. I want to thank every one of our listeners or people who watch us on YouTube. Thank you. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.